I woke up to the sound of engines and slamming car doors. It was barely past sunrise, and my peaceful Saturday morning had already been ruined. At first, I thought maybe one of my neighbors was hosting a yard sale or a party, but as the noise grew louder, a sense of unease crept in. Something was wrong. Throwing on an old flannel, I stepped onto my porch and immediately felt my stomach drop. Dozens of cars were lined up in neat rows across my farm. A steady stream of vehicles rolled in, tires digging into my carefully tilled soil. Just last night, that same field had been an empty stretch of land I had been planning to plant in the coming week. Now, it looked like a makeshift parking lot. A blonde woman in a crisp blue blazer stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, waving in more cars like a traffic director at a shopping mall. Her smile was wide and plastic, the kind of grin people wear when they believe they're in charge of everything around them. She was enjoying this. Fury boiled in my chest. I jumped off the porch and strode toward her, my boots crunching against the dry dirt. Rusty, my old farm dog, barked at my side, sensing my anger. "Hey!" I called out, voice sharp. "What the hell do you think you're doing on my land?" The woman turned, looking at me like I was the one trespassing. Her expression was pure irritation, as if my presence was an inconvenience. "Good morning," she chirped, her fake smile still plastered on. "I'm Linda Whitmore, president of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association. You must be Mr. Miller. We've been meaning to get in touch with you about joining our community." My jaw tightened. Joining their community? "I don't give a damn who you are," I shot back. "This is my property. You and your people are trespassing." Linda tilted her head condescendingly, as if I were some lost child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Oh, you must be mistaken," she said sweetly. "This lot was designated as community overflow parking years ago in our HOA bylaws. It's standard procedure during large events. Today, we have a golf tournament, and I'm sure you understand how important that is for the community." I blinked. Overflow parking? This was my farmland. I had never agreed to anything like that, and I sure as hell wasn't about to let it slide. "This land has been in my family for generations," I growled. "We're not part of your HOA. Never have been." Linda barely acknowledged my words, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Well, the previous board must have had an agreement with your grandfather," she said airily. "We've used this space for years without issue." "Bullshit." My voice came out hard, cutting through the morning air. "Show me one document with my signature on it." Linda hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, her polite mask cracked just enough to show a sliver of annoyance. Behind her, more cars continued to pull in. A man in golf attire leaned out of his Mercedes window. "Hurry up," he called out. "We'll be late for tea time." That was when I saw a massive truck rumbling toward my back field. It was headed straight for my tomato plants. "Stop that truck right now!" I shouted, breaking into a sprint. I barely heard Linda's indignant protests as I sprinted toward the truck barreling toward my crops. My boots pounded against the dirt, heart slamming in my chest as the massive vehicle inched closer to my carefully tended rows of tomatoes. The driver, a man wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, looked startled as I waved my arms, signaling for him to stop. At the last possible moment, he hit the brakes, the heavy tires coming to a stop just inches from my plants. Rolling down his window, he gave me a confused look. "The lady at the entrance told me to park big vehicles back here," he said, gesturing toward Linda. I whirled around to face her, my hands clenched into fists. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her perfect smile gone. Her expression was pure annoyance now, as if I was some irrational fool causing an unnecessary scene. "Mr. Miller, you're being unreasonable," she said, voice clipped. "This land has been used as overflow parking for years. Now, I suggest you calm down before you embarrass yourself in front of the community." That was it. I'd had enough. "You have 1 hour to get every single car off my land," I said, voice like steel. "After that, I'm calling the sheriff. Any car left here will be towed at the owner's expense." Linda's eyes darkened. "You wouldn't dare." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Try me." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her face. Then, as if remembering she held the power in this situation, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Evergreen Meadows is home to the mayor, 2 city council members, and Judge Carter," she said smoothly. "Who do you think the sheriff will side with? Some stubborn farmer or the people who fund his department?" I jerked my arm away from where she had lightly grabbed it. That sounded an awful lot like a threat. Her gaze hardened. "It's just reality, Mr. Miller. You need to learn how things work around here." I turned on my heel and marched back to my house, my hands shaking with rage. Once inside, I wasted no time dialing the county records office. "This is Hank Turner," a friendly voice answered. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to steady my voice. "Hank, this is Jake Miller. I need to check if there are any easements or agreements attached to my property. It's urgent." "We close in 45 minutes, Hank said. "Can you get here now?" "I'll be there in 20. When I glanced back outside, my blood boiled all over again. Instead of cars leaving, more were arriving. Linda was still directing them, smirking as she glanced toward my house. This wasn't about parking anymore. This was war. The drive to the records office felt like an eternity. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough for my knuckles to turn white, my mind racing. If Linda was lying, and I was certain she was, I needed proof. If my land was truly private, I'd have legal grounds to shut her down for good. When I pushed open the heavy doors of the county records office, Hank Turner, a gray-haired man in suspenders, looked up from his desk. "Jake Miller," he said, standing. "I knew your grandfather well. What can I do for you?" I quickly explained the situation, my frustration bleeding through. Hank listened carefully, then nodded. "Let's take a look." He led me to a small research room, where he began pulling thick folders from a filing cabinet. After 20 minutes of searching, he leaned back in his chair. "Just as I thought," he said, tapping a yellow document. "There's no easement allowing the HOA to use your land. Not a single legal document shows your grandfather ever agreed to let them park there." Relief washed over me, but before I could say anything, Hank pulled another file from the stack. But that's not the interesting part. He slid a second document in front of me. My eyes narrowed as I studied it. It was a power easement agreement, signed 30 years ago, granting access to the power company to run electrical lines through the north corner of my property. I looked up at Hank. "What does that mean?" "It means," Hank said with a small smirk, "the main transformer that powers all of Evergreen Meadows is on your land." The words hit me like a freight train. The HOA community, Linda's entire neighborhood, depended on electricity running through my property. I let out a slow breath. "Are you saying that if I restrict access to this transformer, they'd be in trouble?" Hank nodded. "Big trouble. The HOA has no alternative power supply. If maintenance can't be performed, outages could happen. They'd have to reroute everything, which would cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and take months of city approval." I leaned back in my chair, my pulse quickening. "And those payments?" Hank typed something into his computer. "Your grandfather had the power company pay him an annual fee for access. After he passed, the payments have been accumulating in a trust account. You need to update the ownership records, but technically, they owe you back payments." I felt a slow, dangerous grin spread across my face. Linda thought she had all the power. But I was the one keeping her precious community's lights on. I left the office with official copies of the property deeds and easement agreements, my mind racing with the possibilities. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I already had a plan. I called Pinewood Electric's emergency line. "This is Jake Miller," I said, gripping the phone. "I own the property where transformer E245 is located. I need to report an unauthorized access issue." After being transferred twice, a man with a no-nonsense voice answered. "Mr. Miller, this is Tom Reynolds, Operations Manager. What seems to be the problem?" "I believe someone from the Evergreen Meadows HOA has been illegally accessing the transformer on my property." Tom went silent for a moment, then said, "That's a serious safety violation. Only authorized Pinewood Electric personnel should be near that equipment." "That's what I thought," I replied. "I'd like a list of anyone who has legitimate access, and I'd also like to restrict entry until this situation is resolved." "Understood. I'll have our legal department contact you," Tom said. "In the meantime, I'll send a technician out to inspect the transformer." Perfect. By the time I ended the call, my property was empty, the cars were gone. But deep tire tracks and crushed plants littered my field. Linda hadn't won. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. By the fourth call, I answered with a clipped, "Who is this?" A smug voice filled the line. "Mr. Miller, this is Rick Coleman, attorney for Evergreen Meadows HOA. We need to discuss your recent interference with community operations." I exhaled sharply, already annoyed. "If this is about your illegal parking lot, we have nothing to discuss." "Oh, it's about much more than that," Rick said smoothly. "You see, by restricting access to the community power transformer, you are endangering the residents of Evergreen Meadows. People with medical conditions rely on stable electricity. Families have young children. Do you really want to be the reason someone's grandmother can't run her oxygen machine?" I gritted my teeth. "Nice try, but I'm not cutting the power. I'm just ensuring unauthorized personnel stay the hell off my land." Rick chuckled, as if he had already won. "Mr. Miller, let's be reasonable. The HOA board has voted to offer you a financial incentive, $10,000, in exchange for permanently allowing our community to use your land as overflow parking." My grip tightened on the phone. "You think you can bribe me?" Rick sighed dramatically. "Think of it as a cooperative agreement. You can take the money, or you can take the legal route, which will cost you far more in court fees. Oh, and by the way, you'll be receiving an official violation notice from the HOA. You're in direct violation of community aesthetic standards." I nearly laughed. "I don't live in your damn community." "That's debatable," Rick said. "Our records show that your property is within Evergreen Meadows boundaries. You should be receiving a letter shortly. Have a nice day, Mr. Miller." The line went dead. I was still staring at my phone when Rusty started barking outside. I stepped onto the porch just as the mail truck pulled away, leaving behind a certified letter in my mailbox. The envelope had the Evergreen Meadows HOA logo stamped at the top. Tearing it open, I scanned the contents, and rage shot through me like wildfire. The letter fined me $5,000 for unauthorized landscape modifications and agricultural activities contrary to community aesthetic standards. It also ordered me to remove all farm equipment within 72 hours or face additional fines of $500 per day. At the bottom, in perfect cursive, was Linda Whitmore's smug little signature. And right next to it, a handwritten note. "Perhaps now you'll reconsider our generous parking agreement." I nearly crushed the letter in my fist. This wasn't just an HOA overreach. This was war. I stormed inside and called Matt Hargrove, my lawyer. Within minutes, he was reviewing the letter, muttering under his breath. This is complete garbage. They can't fine you if you're not a member. That's what I thought. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my anger. But that's not even the worst part. They're claiming my farm is part of the HOA. Matt was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice far too serious, he said, "Jake, I need you to get to the county office right now." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my keys. The county records office was quieter than usual. Hank Turner looked up from his desk as I walked in, his expression shifting to concern. "Something told me I'd be seeing you again soon," he said. I dropped the HOA violation letter onto his desk. "They're claiming my farm is part of Evergreen Meadows. I need to know if they pulled something shady with the property boundaries." Hank frowned and turned to his computer. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as he searched through digital records. After a few minutes, his expression darkened. "Jake," he turned the monitor toward me. "Take a look at this." I leaned in. My stomach dropped. The screen showed a recently filed document, dated 6 months ago. It was an amendment to the original Evergreen Meadows community map. And in that amendment, my farm was suddenly included within HOA territory. That's a goddamn forgery. Hank nodded grimly. "It gets worse. They also filed an official community service easement request for your property. If it goes through, the HOA could claim full access rights to your land." I clenched my jaw. So they're trying to steal my property on paper before I can fight back. Hank sighed, rubbing his temples. "And it looks like they're moving fast. If this paperwork isn't challenged, they could have legal grounds to push you out." The air in the room felt thick. I forced myself to breathe. "I need a copy of everything. Every single document they filed." Hank nodded and started printing. "I'll also file a formal fraud complaint with the county clerk's office. But you need to get a lawyer involved, immediately." I was already dialing Matt's number. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. Linda and her people were trying to steal my farm. And I was about to make them regret every damn second of it. I sat in my truck outside the county records office, gripping the folder of documents Hank had given me. The weight of what I had just discovered pressed down hard. Linda Whitmore and her crooked HOA weren't just fining me, they were actively trying to steal my farm. On paper, they were reshaping property lines, forging documents, and filing claims that would make it legally impossible for me to fight back. If I hadn't checked when I did, I could have woken up one morning to find my farm had been legally absorbed into Evergreen Meadows without me even knowing. The thought made my blood boil. Before heading home, I called Matt Hargrove. The moment he answered, I laid everything out, the fake boundary map, the community service easement request, and the blatantly forged amendment that now included my land in the HOA's jurisdiction. There was a long silence on the line before he let out a low whistle. "Jake, this isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This is fraud. If they're faking property claims, that's a felony. We need to hit them with a legal injunction, immediately. Can you file it today?" "Already on it," he said. "But listen, you need to be careful. If they're willing to forge documents, there's no telling what else they're capable of." I knew he was right. Linda wasn't just trying to take my land. She wanted me out, for good. I drove home with a singular focus, preparing for battle. The moment I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something off. A white utility truck was parked near the far side of my property, just past the fence line. I didn't recognize it. I stepped out of my truck slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the vehicle. Then I saw two men in hard hats standing near the transformer. Pinewood Electric workers? No. I knew their uniforms. These guys weren't from the power company. One of them had a bolt cutter slung over his shoulder. The other was holding a clipboard marked Evergreen Meadows HOA. My entire body went rigid. They were tampering with the transformer. I stormed toward them. "Hey! Get the hell off my land!" The man with the clipboard turned, clearly startled. "Sir, we're here on behalf of the Evergreen Meadows HOA. Just performing some scheduled work." "You're not with the power company," I snapped. "And you sure as hell don't have permission to touch that transformer." His jaw tightened. "Mr. Miller, this is part of an approved infrastructure project. The HOA is rerouting the power grid to ensure a more efficient distribution." That was all I needed to hear. They were trying to cut me out. Linda had found a way to reroute the electrical system, removing my property from the grid entirely. Once the transformer was relocated, I'd lose my leverage. I pulled out my phone. "Move one more inch, and I'm calling the sheriff." The second worker hesitated. The first one, though, clearly didn't like being challenged. "Sir, you're obstructing a community improvement project." "I don't give a damn what you call it," I shot back. "This is illegal. I have a legally binding easement with Pinewood Electric. Only their employees can work on this transformer." That's when Sarah Bennett appeared at the fence line. "Jake," she called. "You need to see this." I jogged over, heart still hammering with rage. She was holding up her tablet, the screen filled with a series of emails. "I pulled these from the HOA's community update list," she said in a hushed tone. "They weren't meant to be public, but I found something bad." I skimmed the emails, and my stomach dropped. One email, dated 2 nights ago, was from Linda Whitmore to the HOA board. "Jake Miller has made himself a problem. If we want to proceed with our development plans, we need to resolve this issue permanently. My cousin at the power company has assured me that rerouting the transformer is possible. Once that's done, he'll have no leverage left. Additionally, we've been working on securing official ownership records that prove the farm is legally under Evergreen Meadows jurisdiction. Once finalized, we can start the eviction process. This matter will be settled soon. Trust me." I felt a cold wave of fury wash over me. "They're not just moving the power lines," I murmured. "They're trying to evict me." Sarah swallowed hard. "Jake, there's more." She scrolled down to another email. This one was from Rick Coleman, the HOA's attorney. "Linda, we're close to finalizing the deed transfer documents." The bold man's signature was easy enough to match. "Once the final paperwork is approved, Miller won't have a legal claim to the land. I'll update you after the next meeting." I saw red. They had forged a deed. They had faked my grandfather's signature. Linda had planned this from the beginning. I turned back toward the men at the transformer, my grip tightening on my phone. "Get out. Now." They hesitated. I started dialing. "Yeah, I need to report an unauthorized utility tampering incident on private property," I said loud enough for them to hear. "I have evidence that the Evergreen Meadows HOA is conducting illegal modifications to a legally protected power easement." The two men exchanged a glance. The one with the bolt cutters cursed under his breath, then shoved past me and got into the truck. Within seconds, they were peeling off down the road. I turned back to Sarah, who was still clutching her tablet. Her hands were shaking. "What do we do?" she asked. I took a deep breath, my heart still racing. "We expose them," I said. "Tonight." Sarah nodded. "There's an HOA meeting at 7. "Good," I said. "Because I'm about to burn them to the ground." The Evergreen Meadows HOA meeting was already in full swing when I walked through the double doors of the community center. The room was packed, neighbors seated in neat rows, murmuring amongst themselves as Linda Whitmore stood at the front, gesturing at a giant map of my farm, now labeled as Proposed Community Park and Parking Expansion. She was mid-sentence when she saw me. Her lips curled into a smirk. "Well, Well, Mr. Miller, have you come to finally accept the future of our community? I didn't respond. I walked straight to the front, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and placed them on the table beside her. I made sure everyone could see the bold, capitalized words at the top, "Fraudulent Property Transfer Investigation." "This," I said, my voice carrying through the hushed room, "is what your HOA leadership has been doing behind your backs." I flipped to the first page and pointed at the forged deed transfer document. Linda and her board attempted to illegally claim my farm by falsifying records and forging my grandfather's signature. A ripple of shock and whispers spread through the crowd. "Lies!" Linda snapped, but her voice wavered. I clicked my laptop, projecting an email onto the large screen behind me. It was the one Sarah had found, the message from Rick Coleman admitting to the forgery. The room exploded. Shouts of, "That's illegal," and "You stole from us," filled the air. A man in the front row stood, glaring at Linda. "You used our HOA dues to fund this?" Linda's face drained of color. This is..." I held up another document. "This is the infrastructure rerouting plan Linda put in motion to cut my farm out of the power grid. She was prepared to spend tens of thousands of your dollars to sabotage my land." Jeff Coleman, the HOA attorney, was already backing toward the exit. But before he could slip away, the doors burst open. Sheriff's deputies entered, followed by Tom Reynolds from Pinewood Electric. "Mr. Miller," Tom said, addressing me, "we just confirmed that the power transformer was tampered with. Surveillance footage from our technicians shows unauthorized personnel accessing it, including someone who looks an awful lot like Linda Whitmore." Linda let out a strangled noise. A deputy stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have evidence of trespassing, property fraud, and conspiracy. Please place your hands where we can see them." As the room erupted in stunned gasps, Linda turned to the crowd, her voice rising in desperation. "You need me. I built this community. You can't." But it was over. By the time Linda was led out in handcuffs, the HOA board was already in shambles. One by one, members turned on each other, denying involvement, demanding lawyers, scrambling to save themselves. I stood there, watching the downfall unfold, knowing that the fight was finally won. Days later, Sarah met me at my fence line. The new HOA board voted to dismantle everything Linda did. "They're offering to pay for the damage to your farm." I smirked, shaking my head. "Guess they finally learned what happens when you mess with the wrong farmer." She laughed. "So, what now?" I glanced over my land, taking in the peaceful quiet that had once been shattered by Linda's greed. "Now?" I shrugged. "I get back to work. Because unlike them, I don't need to control everything to be happy. I just need my farm." Ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a Karen on a power trip? Drop your story below. I want to hear how bad it got.